You know, one of these days I'm going to actually pay somebody or make a real like podcast bumper. You know, one of those really cool bumpers where it's got the guy with the super sweet voice and he comes in, he's like, it's the Dirt Bike Channel podcast, the place you go for everything, you know, cool. Won't that be awesome when I get that? That'll be super. What I want everyone to do right now is just pretend that you're listening to like some dude that's like got really cool music and it's like the stylized thing and everything, and it's the way that the show gets introduced, and you play it on the, you know, it's bumper stuff. It happens at the beginning, it happens at the end. It introduced the podcast host without him having to introduce himself, because how lame would that be? Imagine if I had to sit here every week or every episode and introduce myself like I'm doing right now. How embarrassing. Anyway, that's what's happening right now. I'm introducing myself. My name is Kyle. I am the producer of this podcast, right? I'm the producer of the Dirt Bike Channel online and all this other stuff, and I'm going to jump right into it. Today we are going to talk about if you could only have one bike, okay? So I get this question a lot. People email me questions like this or kind of in this arena, this genre of, hey, if you could only have one dirt bike, what would it be? Well, if you paid attention to the channel, you'll probably notice that there's a certain type of dirt bike or a genre of dirt bike that I pretty much have all the time, and then I'm testing these other bikes on top of it, you know. So without spoiling, I will get into that, and we're going to talk about exactly what bike I think I would use if it was my only bike, that it was the only one that I could ride. Now, I also want to say that I could be happy on a lot of bikes. There's a lot of really, really good bikes, and the more you ride one bike, the more you get used to it, and the more you get accustomed to it, and the more you start to jive and gel with that bike. And so I can be happy with a lot, but I have a preference, obviously, and I have some that I seem to gel with more than others, and I'm sure you do too. So I just kind of put some notes down as I was contemplating doing this podcast here. You know, if you're just going to have one bike, this is really the biggest determining factor here. Is where are you going to ride that? You know, where are you going to be riding it, and what are you going to be doing with the bike? So what I mean by that is, if you live in an area of the country or an area of the world where you have to be street legal on the bike to connect the trails in order to do any riding, then a 4-stroke dirt bike you might be better off with a 4-stroke. I mean, maybe not now with the TPI bikes, with the TPI 2-strokes, because you can just go to the gas pump and pump them full of fuel with just pump gas right there. But I don't like the idea. I don't love the idea of riding long distances on the road at a constant RPM on a 2-stroke. I don't like the idea of riding on the road for a long time on any dirt bike anyway, because that means I'm going to need DOT or street legal tires, and street legal tires suck in the dirt. So, you know, but if you did live in an area where, because I have people tell me all the time, like, I can't have a dirt bike unless it is street legal, and so I'm like, well, I'll probably go with some sort of a 4-stroke in that case, you know. And then also, if you're only going to be riding in a motocross track and you're a 30-year-old man or a 40-year-old man or whatever, or even a 25-year-old realist who knows that they're probably not going to win like any motocross races and make any money racing or anything, and you're just doing this for the fun of it, you know, maybe a 254-stroke would probably be the best way to go. And you might say, hey, I'm a super lazy rider, so I'm going to have a 454-stroke and make my way around this motocross track or whatever. And that's totally cool. Like, I think if I was just riding in a motocross track, I'd probably have a 254-stroke. That's what I think I would have, you know, because the 4-strokes definitely offer some advantages. I get a lot of people asking me about motocross stuff, which I think is weird because I don't do motocross riding, but still a ton of people still asking me questions, and I preface that by saying, look, dude, I don't really know a ton about this stuff, but here's some things that I picked up on. You know, on the other hand, though, you know, talking about only having one bike, if you're the type of person that wants to ride the hard enduro style riding, you know, the technical rocky stuff, the wood stuff, you know, the tighter single track stuff, you know, the 2-strokes offer some real advantages, you know. One advantage is just that they are lighter. They feel lighter even when you're riding them, because there's a big difference between how much they weigh on the scale and then what they feel like on the trail. I've talked about that at length in a lot of the different YouTube videos that I've done. You know, the 2-strokes also have a ton of torque down low and they don't stall. And I still I mean, they don't stall as easily, is what I'm trying to say. I still meet people all the time, probably weekly, on email when they are just befuddled by this whole, concept that the two-stroke has torque. They're always kind of comparing their experience around or upon a two-stroke stopped at like a YZ65 or an RM65 or something, and of course that bike didn't have a ton of low-end torque. And then they moved on to some other four-stroke bike, and they just assume that the four-strokes have more torque, and it's like, well, a 454 stroke has a lot of torque, and a 252 stroke has a lot of torque. But guess what? There's a difference between the torque that like pulls you up a jump face as you're getting into the meat of the power, and then there's the torque at the very bottom of the RPM range, right before the bike stalls. And so there's that torque on a motocross track, which the four-stroke is awesome for, but there's this other torque that I need when I'm riding technical single-track mountain trails, enduro-style stuff. I need the torque when it's right before the engine dies. Right? So the RPM is down low. We're talking in the 2,000 RPM range, and then they'll start to die. You get a dirt bike down around 1,000 RPMs, and they're going to die, right? And because they're set to idle somewhere between 1,800 and 2,200 RPMs typically, okay? And so on that four-stroke, if it's, let's just use the round numbers, that four-stroke, it's idling at 2,000 RPMs. You're going really slow. You're feathering the clutch. You're feathering the brake, feathering the clutch, doing all these things to try to get through a really tricky section. And now you're down around 2,000 RPMs. Well, the four-stroke is only firing 1,000 times per minute. Even though the engine is going, 2,000 RPMs, it's only firing 1,000 times in a minute. Whereas the two-stroke is in that exact same situation is firing 2,000 times a minute. Because it's the power stroke, the exhaust stroke is halfway through the power. I mean, as the piston is coming up, it's forcing the exhaust out, and then it gets into the compression stroke all in one. So it fires every time it comes up to the top, which gives it this unique low down torque, and it doesn't stall because the piston is being fired back down with a combustion stroke every time it comes to the top. Whereas on the four stroke, it doesn't do that. So that's probably the biggest reason why the enduro bikes, most of the hard enduro bikes, are two strokes. That's why the people ride them, is because they don't stall as easily in those low RPM situations. And that's the type of stuff that really interests me. It doesn't mean that I won't get into more track riding later in life or something like that. But over the last 10 years, I've been really drawn towards mountain single track, trail riding, hard enduro style stuff. Some of it's really technical, some of it's fast and flowing. It's hard to show some of the really technical stuff to everyone in the world, because some of the time that technical stuff might be on a trail that isn't a trail or something. So, and that happens in our industry, as everyone knows, and we're not trying to beat up the land. But I'm not showing everything that I do to everyone. And so not all the riding, that's the funny thing, is people think that on my YouTube channel, they think they know everything that's happening. They think they know all the trails that I go on. They think they know everything that I do to my dirt bikes and every bike that I ride. And I'm like, only 5 to 10% of the things that I do that are related to dirt bikes ever make it to a public video, so just funny. But so for me, the bike is going to be, if I'm only going to be able to have one bike, for me, it's going to be a two-stroke. I talked about this in a video not too long ago, and it's one of the reasons is because I have more fun. I just have more fun. They speak to my soul more. I can jive on the four strokes, and I mentioned on that video that a lot of times when I'm riding a four-stroke, I just feel like I'm overdressed. I feel like I'm dressed in a suit. I'm going to a beach party, but I'm dressed in a suit that I would take to a board meeting. You know what I mean? And I just kind of feel like I can have fun when I get to the party, but I'm overdressed the whole time. And that's just sort of how I feel when I'm riding a four-stroke. Versus when I ride a two-stroke, I feel like I'm dressed the part. I feel like I'm going to that same beach party, but I'm dressed in board shorts and a tank top and flip-flops, and I'm ready to have fun. That's just how I end up feeling when I'm riding the two-strokes. And then there's those other advantages about them not stalling and torque down low where I need it, feeling light, feeling agile, feeling nimble, you know. And yeah, I'll admit, a lot of times the 4-strokes feel more stable, especially if you're going out in the desert through the whoops or whatever. The 4-strokes tend to feel more stable, but that also means that they don't feel quite as agile, generally speaking. So come down, if I'm going to have one bike, it comes down to either a 252 stroke or a 302 stroke. And now I've got to decide, let's just narrow it down to the manufacturer. So, the KTM XC line is the obvious choice for me because of a number of things. KTM has all the pieces put together in one spot. They've got the high-end components in one spot. They've got the gearing dialed down. I think they have the suspension nailed. But other manufacturers are getting very close, like Beta. Beta is getting extremely close, especially with their 2020 dirt bikes, which I haven't been able to ride yet. I mean, I've ridden the 200RR that they gave me. I rode it one time this week. My pinky I broke it about 4.5 weeks ago, and so at 4 weeks and 1 day, I decided to go out there and ride the Beta 200. It's a 2020 Beta 200RR. And my grip strength is still really low, and so I gave myself a blister on the thumb and whatever. So I'm gonna try to ride that one maybe again tomorrow. We'll just kind of see. But I'm breaking myself back in slowly while this finger gets all the way caught up or healed up. But the Beta 250 and the Beta 300 in 2020 are going to have counterbalanced motors. And so that brings them even one step closer to having all the pieces put together. Now, I hope the counterbalancer is awesome. I had one person tell me they rode one and they were underwhelmed. They thought it vibrated more than their KTM, but I can't verify that. I'm going to have to try that, and I'm excited. But as of right now, there's only one manufacturer that I think has all of their ducks lined up in a row for the pinnacle of dirt bikes, and that's KTM, and it would be the XC line of bikes. And honestly, you can get this stuff on any dirt bike, a 2017 KTM and up on the XC line, and I don't even care if it has carburetor or the TPI. Now that the XC is coming in the TPI, you could give me either one. I mean, obviously I want a kickstart or whatever, but like a 2017 KTM is counterbalanced. It's got electric start. It's got a hydraulic clutch. It's got a good range, a 2.6 gallon fuel tank on there. It's got highly, highly adjustable forks. It's the Air AER 48 forks, the Air forks. I'll talk about that just a little bit more. There's a really balanced feel on the XC. It's stable, yet it's nimble. It's got equal spacing between the gears, and that is just the thing. And a lot of people would be saying, well, Kyle, the perfect bike for you then would be a 2019 KTM 250 or 300 XC. And I'm not going to argue with you there on that one, because at least that one is a simple carburetor. It's still got a backup Kickstarter, so it's got all of the things that I want and nothing that I don't want. And so, yeah, you'd be right on that. And so I could dig a 2019 KTM 250 or 300 XC, and I could ride that bike for many, many years as my only bike. And a few months ago, before I got the 2020s, that's what I would have told you. If I would have done this podcast, or we would have had this conversation before I rode the 2020 KTM 300 and 250 XC TPI bikes, I would have told you, well, I would just do the 2019 because it still has the backup Kickstarter. It still has, a carburetor, so it's super simple. I can tune it on the fly. It's a little bit less expensive. That would be easy to say. But now having been able to ride, the 2020s for 40 hours, and I haven't ridden them for even 1 minute since I did my 40-hour review here on this podcast a few weeks ago, because I've been waiting for my finger to heal up. But having ridden those 2020s for that amount of time, I can tell you the 2020s are a little bit better than the 2019s. I'm just talking about the way that the frame handles, the way that chassis handles, and the way that the suspension handles everything. They have made improvements. They're not drastic improvements, but they have made improvements. And so, if people come to me and they say, Kyle, I can get like $1,000 off on a 2019, or I pay full price on the 2020, KTM XC bike or whatever. I'm like, hey, let's just save the $1,000. But if you don't have that option, and it's, it's like, hey, I've got the 2020 and the 2019 is a couple $100 less, I say get the 2020 because it is better. it's a little bit better. Now, they dropped off the Kickstarter, which obviously I don't like, but the 2020 is it's a little better, and I've got riding buddies that will agree with me on that. So I'll take the 2019 or the 2020, the bike, the way that they have them counterbalanced, where they don't vibrate. I was just riding that Beta just the other day, and it was the Beta 200, and I only rode it for 1.1 or 1.2 engine hours, right? Because I'm just slowly getting back into it. Didn't want to hurt my hand. I didn't have a lot of grip strength. And if I was just kind of out on the single track, I didn't notice the vibration. It's not bad. It doesn't vibrate bad. But then I dropped off onto a dirt road to kind of do a transition and shorten the little loop that I was doing, this little single track loop. And I spent about 5 minutes or so just kind of on a dirt road and a couple different dirt roads. And by the time I got back to the single track, my hands were starting to go a little bit numb. And then I started paying attention to it. Once my hands started to feel a little bit numb, which I haven't felt for quite a while because I haven't been riding a uncounterbalanced two-stroke for a while, then I noticed my feet were kind of getting a little itchy, And I'm not saying it was a huge thing, but the counterbalanced thing is a big deal to me, It's a big deal, and that 200 vibrates more than any bike that I have right now. I have 2019 KTM 300XC WTPI. I have a 2019 KTM 250XC carbureted bike, and then I've got two 2020s. So I've got 4 different KTMs that are all counterbalanced, and then I've got this Beta. One of them is not like the other because one of them vibrates more, and that can take a toll on you. I can tell you right now, I've been on a number of rides recently where we were gone away from the truck from anywhere from 6 to 8 hours. The rides might have been 3 to 4.5 or 5 engine hours. I don't want to be doing that on a bike that isn't counterbalanced anymore. Obviously, I've got to have electric start. That's huge. Whenever we stop on the hillsides, if you are doing a hill climb or whatever, you get caught in a nasty situation, you tip the bike over off a nasty root or tree or whatever, we find ourselves in some pretty precarious positions in places that I wouldn't have thought possible 5-6 years ago. And having electric start is so amazing when you get in those situations. So I don't want to go back to a bike that doesn't have electric start. As much as I love the YZ250Xs of the world, that sucker has got to have electric start before it is a legitimate contender for the type of riding that I'm doing now. And it's even more so now than when I did the review on that bike. When I did the review on that bike, I was riding some hard stuff, some nasty stuff, but not nearly as much as I am now. And so now if I was doing that review on the YZ250X today, my biggest complaint would be no electric start. It just would. Because it can come back to bite me in so many times. A bike's got to have a 50 to 80 mile range, I think, and it just depends on the terrain. And that's one place where the TPI bikes are better. They get a little bit better fuel economy because they don't dump any out the overflows in the vents on a carburetor. And so the TPI bike is probably a little better on that. I mentioned that the air fork is awesome. The reason why I think it's awesome is because I can adjust the air pressure, and I've started to run less and less pressure in these things. And the less pressure I run in them, the more I like them. And then now that the temperatures are getting colder and we're going to be starting to move more out into the desert, I'm going to start running more air pressure than I did all summer long because the speeds will be higher. And so I will want more air pressure to absorb, to hold me up a little bit better and absorb some of the faster speeds that we're going to be doing. And the air fork gives me the ability to do that in a way that I can't do with a conventional spring fork. I've never had a problem with any of my air forks, and none of my buddies have had a problem with the air fork, like losing pressure or anything like that. The XC has this perfectly balanced feel. It just feels like it's more stable to me than like an XCW. But it's still nimble. And then the other big reason why I would say the XC bike over the XCW bike, if I'm only going to have one, is because the equal spacing between the gears. So to some of you, it'll sound like a broken record because you might have heard me say this a lot on YouTube videos, but I'm picking up a lot of people that are new listeners, and so they haven't heard this before. The spacing between the gears is a huge thing with me. if you're going to ride a motocross bike like a YZ250 or a CRF 450 or whatever, motocross bike is going to have 5 gears, and they're going to be what we call a close ratio transmission. So the gears are closely spaced together, and they do that purposely for racing purposes on a track. Works well on a track, obviously. If we're going to ride off-road, though, we're going to have some sections where it's tight and technical. We're going to have some sections where, we need to transition between places. Even desert racers experience this a lot. So the off-road bikes will typically have 6 speeds, and then they'll either have a semi-close ratio transmission or a wide ratio transmission. So what's the difference there? Wide ratio transmission typically means you've got a really low first gear, a low first and second gear, and then the gears kind of space out after that, and your sixth gear is kind of like your overdrive to get in between places. And that would be like on an XCW bike or a WR in the Yamaha line. Think of a Honda CRF 250 or 450X. I'm not sure if those have 6 speeds or not. I can't remember right off the top of my head. But like Yamaha, the YZ250FX, that's a wide ratio transmission, 6 speeds. First gear is really low, and then it goes up from there. Then KTM has another line. They've got the XC line, which is with this semi-close ratio transmission. And the beauty of that transmission is everything is equally spaced, at least within reason, equally spaced. So your first gear is a little bit lower than like a motocross bike would be, but it's not as low as what these wide ratio bikes would be. So that is awesome. And then second gear is equally spaced out. Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, they're equally spaced out, and that is awesome. The problem that I end up having with these wide ratio transmissions is that first gear is too low. It's almost unusable. There's only a few times that you can use first gear on that bike because it's so low. And yeah, if you're in first gear and it's a super, super nasty section, first gear is pretty good. Problem is, most of the times that I need first gear, the first gear is too low on a bike that's got that wide ratio transmission. I want it a little bit higher, which is what I get on the XC line. And then second gear is also a little bit too low. And so I'm wanting a little bit more speed out of second gear when I'm on a wide ratio transmission. And then there's this big gap between second gear and third gear. And so you shift out of second gear, and now you're not going fast enough for third gear to pull it. And so I just find myself always in between, second and third gear on those W bikes or those wide ratio transmission bikes. And there's nothing you can do to change that. People always talk about, just adjust the gearing. You're not addressing my problem, which my problem is the spacing between the gears. So, that's why I like the XC, is because it's got equal spacing between the gears. So, if I'm going to have one bike, for me, it's going to be a KTM XC. Now, you could do the same thing with the TX, the Husqvarna TX line, because that's basically the same thing. The only problem there is, for some unseen reason, Husqvarna does not make a 250 TX or a TX 250. 300 TX 300. It's TX 300. I'm having a brain fart. They don't make the TX 300. Or they don't make the TX 250 is what I'm trying to say. Husqvarna only makes the TX 300. And that kind of sucks, because let's talk about the 250 for a little bit. The 250, KTM has a 250 XC and a 250 and a 300 XC, and the bikes are identical except for the piston and the stroke. Everything else on the 250 versus the 300 is identical. And, I love my 300s. I love them. And you can kind of see where this is going. I love my 300s because there are places that I don't want to go unless I'm on a 300. If the trail gets super nasty and it's a super technical place and I know it's just going to be slow and whatever, I will want to be on my 300, like a 300 XE or the Husqvarna TX 300. But I don't always ride slow stuff. And I love the way that the 250 feels, and I love the way the 250 makes me feel when I'm riding it in most of the situations. And since the 250 can do everything the 300 can do, and this is proved out by looking at some of the best riders that I've ever ridden with. Obviously, if you look at Eresberg or whatever, Graham Jarvis and Cody Webb and all these guys that are placing, Johnny Walker and Manny Lettenbichler and whoever else, Wade Young. These guys are all riding 300 two-strokes, because it gives them every advantage in some of these nasty races. But everything, if you can do it on a 300, you can also do it on a 250. The 250, just makes me have to compensate just a teeny bit more, like a fraction, like a 2 percentage points more on the clutch than I would on the 300. But I love the way it makes me feel. The 250, I just love it. There's something about the way the power is delivered and the way the motor spins up and the free revving feeling of it. It just seems like it's a little bit more snappy. It's a little bit more playful. It's a little bit more smooth. And so if you're going to pin me down to only having one bike right now, it's going to be either a 2019 250 XC or a 2020 250 XC TPI. And I could take either one. But that would be the bike that I would have if I could only ride one bike. It would be that one, 250 XC. And I hope that some of these other, manufacturers can change my mind on that. Maybe a gas XC 250. I think the XC comes before the numbers on the gas. Maybe that bike is going to be amazing. It doesn't have counterbalance yet, at least I don't think. So that's going to be a problem with it. It's supposed to have really good forks, Triple S Kayaba forks on the front of that thing. A lot of people say, hey, not a lot. There are some people, there's at least one guy out there, that says, he says that you can't call yourself a two-stroke fan until you have tried a TM Designs two-stroke. So maybe I need to try one of those. But I think I am a two-stroke fan, even though I haven't ridden the TM. That's just me. So yeah, at this point, I would take if I'm just gonna have one bike, it's gonna be a KTM 250 XC. That's what it's gonna be. Now that doesn't mean that I don't love my 300s. Right now, currently, if you walk out to my shop, there are an equal number of 250s and 300s out there. There's two 250s and there's two 300s. I don't always have that many bikes, but I just happen to have them right now. I'm going to be giving a 250 away and a 300 away here in the sweepstakes that's coming up. If you have been living under a rock or whatever, starting on October 15th, I will be giving away a 2019 250 XC and what day is it? Holy cow, it is the 11th. My watch is wrong. I'll be giving away a 250 XC, a 2019, and also a 2020 KTM 300 XC TPI. So I'll be giving those bikes away, which is why I've got kind of a stash. And then I also have been trying to put more long-term hours on my 2019 KTM 300. So I don't normally have 4 KTMs. I just happen to have them right now. I don't want that many bikes. I'd rather only have 2 bikes. If I could keep it down to where I only have 2 bikes, that would be the perfect number for me. 3 gets a little bit crowded, and 4 or 5 is just nuts. And that's kind of where I've been for a little while, with 4 bikes that I own, and then I've had a Beta on loan to me, and then I swapped and got another Beta on loan to me, and it's just too many. I can't ride them all. In fact, one of them is at Sam's house, and he's trying to put hours on the one bike for me because it's too many hours, it's too many bikes to be riding. But that would be my answer for which bike I would ride if I could only have one. And the crowd goes wild. I need to use these drops more throughout the podcast, but I just get talking so much and I don't do it. Or maybe it would just be kind of dumb. So maybe I should just forget about the drops and keep going with the content. But that's what's going on. So this podcast is either coming out on the 11th or the 12th. I don't know because I don't even know what day it is. I have been head down for the last 2 days straight, just doing video work for this upcoming sweepstakes, to creating the videos, creating the things that are, the launch video and everything, and updating the website. And it's just I've been just stuck in my basement office. And then I decided to bust out of that and do a podcast episode on something that a lot of people had been asking me to do. So if I could only have one bike, KTM 250 XC right now. And I don't care if it's 2019 or 2020. Probably it's 2020 just because it is a little bit better. But then I might get bit sometime when the freaking thing doesn't start on me. I haven't had that happen yet, but it's bound to happen at some point where I'll want the backup Kickstarter. So we'll keep you posted on that. If you guys have suggestions for topics for me to cover on the podcast, I've got a bunch of them. I'm setting up a bunch of interviews. If you've noticed, the last 4 or 5 podcasts in a row have featured a guest on here. So we've had a bunch of different guests, and I plan on doing a mix of that and a mix of what I've just done today, which is just kind of me rambling on. Obviously, most of the time, if it's just going to be me rambling on, the podcast episodes are going to be a little bit shorter. But if I've got a guest here, they're going to be a little bit longer because we've got cool things to talk about with the different guests. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed that with the guests that we've had on, and I will be doing more of that. So email me, Kyle@dirtbikechannel.com. If you're a real person and you're not just trying to sell me something, I respond to every email that gets sent in there. Sometimes I respond to you in an hour or less, and sometimes it takes me 2 days or 3 days because of, maybe I'm out of town or I'm on vacation or something else is going on. But I do respond to all emails. I don't respond to all social media requests because I get so many of them, but I am getting better about answering DMs from Instagram and whatever it is on Facebook, direct messages on Facebook. I don't know. As much as I'm using social media to get some of the word out there, you would think I would be more of a social media pro, but I don't. I'm not. I don't sit there and spend a ton of time on it. So there's a lot more people that are a lot better off. Not every time, but a lot of times I'll go to my wife, with holding my phone in my hand. I'm like, and Instagram is open, and I'm like, how do I do this again, honey? What do I need to do this thing on Instagram? Because I feel like she spends a lot more time on there than I do. I'm only on there to do a post and then respond to a couple people. And I almost invariably, when I start responding to people, I regret it, on social media. But I respond to you if you send me an email. So, like I said, Kyle@dirtbikechannel.com is my email address, and let's talk about it there. If you got a podcast suggestion or if you just have a question or whatever, reach out to me and let's get it figured out. So until next time, keep the rubber side down, and hope you enjoy these podcasts.